I earlier intended to do an example of how to rip an academic book, and the book that I had used as the reference ended up being a pretty poor one. So I wanted to give an example of a book that has some credibility. So actually, I had just typed in tattoos into my library search catalog and just scrolled through the first titles. I didn't even adjust any of the settings, dates, publishers, credibility, stuff like that. And I saw this one because philosophy was in the title, so that attracted my attention. So, tattoos, a philosophy for everyone. I ink, therefore I am. So there's a joke using the Descartes statement, I think, therefore I am. So initially I was thinking that must be just a satire written by some scholar for fun, published by some no-name publisher, but I looked at it and it's published by Wiley Blackwell, which is a very old, reliable, credible academic publisher. So I clicked on it, and this is what I looked at first. I just went right down to the table of contents, so I haven't even examined the book itself yet. I haven't taken a look. I did see that it was published in 2012, so 13 years old. I think there could be a much more recent version of this that would tell us a lot more about how generations have changed, because they have over the last decade. We're seeing, so in 2012, millennials were just entering the workforce, and now we have like Gen Z entering the workforce, so it's a very different shift. So I looked down at the table of contents, expecting it to be a joke. In the very first section, so how to read a tattoo, another perilous quest, I'm like, okay, yeah, this is a satire. And then, are tattoos art? And I was thinking, okay, that's an interesting question. Do they qualify as art? So I'm guessing there's an overview of tattoos in the arts. They're in a good position to answer that question. Fleshy canvas, or the aesthetics of tattoos by itself, really interesting. I'm curious about that myself. And then from feminist and hermeneutical perspectives. So again, a feminist perspective is one that displaces the traditional male perspective. So it isn't just about like body shape and form. It's other non-traditional ways, adopting usually a marginalized perspective. So it's like, where are the voices that we haven't heard from with respect to tattoos? And like, that's going to be the most interesting avenue into understanding what tattoos are about. The previous book, the pop culture, that's what everyone sees. That's the big kind of attractive and seductive, like big pictures and flashing lights. This is going to be the tattoos that no one's talking about. So this like subterranean culture, which gets me excited. As you can tell, just looking at the table of contents, I'm way more interested in this book than the other one. Hermeneutical perspective simply means interpretive framework, so rather than relying on the most common understanding or the maybe cliche ways of interpreting what tattoos mean, like it's all about how good they look or conveying some sort of position in society, looking at all what those things mean. So hermeneutic perspectives, like interpretive frameworks. Okay, the tattooed woman, female tattoos and graffiti, and so maybe a genre of tattoo. Tattooing as feminist liberation. See, all of these are avenues into how tattoos are understood, how they're engaged, that I'm unfamiliar with. So all of this is going to be opening up new doors for me and my own understanding. So this is getting me really excited. Illusions of permanence, the temporary self, brilliant topic. Tattoo may be permanent, but my memory of it isn't. So the dynamic change. We're getting a really good phenomenology of tattoos by all these different questions. I'd be curious if each of these chapters were written by a different scholar. If so, so it says edited by Robert Art, which might mean that each chapter is written by a separate scholar or researcher who's drawing on their own perspective and skill base, expertise. All that said, I am very excited. So let's pull up the book. We'll read it online. And I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I don't need to look up the publisher because I'm familiar with it. I've worked with Wiley before. not as a writer, but as a reviewer. So we've got the table of contents. I'm interested in the introduction, and I'm guessing that's going to be here. Introduction to Tattoos, Philosophy for Everyone. All right, let's get my photo out of here. And try to see all of this. So the think before I am, it looks like they are drawing on the philosophy of Descartes. I'm going to skip over this because I'm not going to read it just yet. So it looks like the cogito, Descartes' cogito in the language of tattooing. But let's get to what they're talking about. So writing as the editor, I've never seen such an enthusiasm expressed by contributors in their emails as was expressed by these authors when submitting abstract ideas for the book. That makes me almost want to cry because everyone's so excited, and I love being part of academic projects where there's genuine enthusiasm. Alright. Besides philosophical questions regarding personal identity, like the ones presented above, this book you'll first find a chapter on the history of tattoos and the arts. Alright, so they're going through all the different chapter contributions, which, by the way, if you're going to give a summary of this book, you can focus primarily on the introduction here, where the editor is introducing each of the contributions made by authors. So they are kind of interpreting what the authors contributed and then fitting it into the whole. So it's a nice kind of synopsis of everything that's there. I'm looking now for the kind of summary where the editor pulls it all together. 18 chapters, so there's an awful lot. Okay. The wordplay, blah, blah, blah. In a sense, the wordplay subtitle has nothing to do with Descartes' original argument, and I admit that freely. However, someone who has chosen to mark herself or himself indelibly with a tattoo might be struck by the subtitle and think, that's right, I do ink, and therefore that ink makes me who I am as a unique person, my own thoughts, beliefs, feelings, and experiences. So a curious look into what this says for identity. I didn't really find a summative takeaway, so let's go right back to before they start introducing the chapters. By claiming that a person's essential nature and identity is some kind of mind or collection of mental capacities, that would make who you are, in essence, what you do. Philosophy of the person investigates these questions. Researchers in this area offer numerous arguments for and against taking the thinking thing as a person's basic essence. Given the bodily-based tattoo is such a strong form of self-expression, my tattoo expresses who I am as a mantra. Okay, here's cool. What I mean by this is that the person with the tattoo realizes not only that she or he is intimately tied to his body, but also that bodily expression is a fundamental way of communicating to others. And so this is a way of being social, also being embodied, and interacting with space and our pasts and future. Connection with the body to express innermost thoughts. The tattoo person might say something like, I'm a person intimately tied. Okay, I think I've seen enough to kind of summarize what this book is about. So this is written by a philosopher, and the philosopher is investigating how tattoos inform a person's identity, and the identity is defined a number of different ways. It's defined by what they see when they look in the mirror, but it's also how they interact with others, how others perceive them. So it's 3 different forms of identity. My guess is there will be more nuances to how that identity is informed by tattoos. in some ways by the anticipation of how it will inform your identity, and then maybe the consequences. So after it happens, maybe discovering new forms of identity, new ways of relating to them. So a lot of hermeneutic or kind of arguments that are interrogating around the phenomenon. And we could list a couple of those examples. There was the religious example, like religious philosophy and whether or not God exists, feminist and hermeneutic inquiries. I'd have to go back to the table of contents. What it says about embodiment and freedom. So there are those existential and phenomenological themes. Bioethics, writing on the body, so the narrative element. So that's like 6 different elements. And notice each time I introduce a new one of those ways of interpreting tattoos in a philosophical way, or perhaps an empirical or hermeneutic way, I can list the author of that article. Now, my guess is we're going to draw on a lot of these themes, but not all of them, so a few of them will be eminently important when we perform our analysis and we start doing interviews and trying to understand what it is our participants are saying. So this is an example of trying to read or rip a book. Again, very briefly, we of course wouldn't stop at this point. There's a lot more to be gained, but in terms of looking at how this book fits in with all of the rest of our literature review, we have a pretty good idea of what it's going to contribute and when and how to investigate it more fully. But this is what it looks like when a book is good or even great. It requires a lot more attention.